Hi, and welcome to this live reading from Talisman by DeRudder Jackson, and this is presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Prologue, Scotland, 10th century. Blood dripped from Finley Sheridan's sword, drops of gore trailing him as he stumbled across the battlefield, too weary for elation at the outcome of the day. Once again, his warriors had taken on the Morrigan's minions and won, but at great cost. The earth and sky converged in one horizonless hue of red. Grass, shields, swords, bodies, sky, sun, all red. Blood red. Ailsa foresaw the victory and the blood. She told him as much. He knew she worried for him while he worried for his sons and his friends. He remembered seeing his eldest, Graham, struggling with the Morrigan's champion while she kept Finley occupied with two lesser warriors. Finley fought them remorselessly until they succumbed to his superior strength and skill. Still, more came, always more. Through the din of battle, he could hear the banshees screaming, shrieking the names of the dead. Urgently, he traversed the field, trying to remember where he'd seen the Morrigan settling her champion on Graham. The wounded and dying called to him, but in his singular mission, he blocked them out, desperate to know about his sons. He'd lost sight of Roridan and Owen, the twins, early in the battle, but he counted on them to take care of each other as they always did. All should be waiting at the rendezvous point at the standing stone near the lock. The burning need to reach his sons goaded him as his legs ate up ground on his way to meet up with his family. His journey to the meeting place took a roundabout route through the fallen and the dying. Halfway across the field, the mists rose around him, and he struggled to find his way. All at once, a form materialized from among the dead, the Morrigan's champion. The distant wails of the banshees told him the dying wasn't over. Automatically, Finley put away thoughts of his family as he readied himself for one last battle. The Morrigan's champion stood at least a head taller than Finley's 6 feet, his torso streaming blood. In the recesses of his mind, Finley thought Graham had damaged this warrior. Then there was no time for thinking, only acting and reacting as the combatants danced their deadly dance. The eeriness of their lone battle echoed in the single clanging of one sword on the other, one sword bashing one shield, one man grunting and screaming as he lunged again and again at the injured warrior, knocking him back toward the stream feeding the lock. At last, Finley saw an opening and plunged his sword to the hilt in the Viking's chest. The man blinked, stunned, before tumbling backward in an ungainly heap of weaponry, flesh, and blood. Without ceremony, Finley put one foot on the warrior's chest and retrieved his sword, which is when he saw the other wound in the man's chest, equally deep, equally fatal. How did the man rise up? How did he fight again? Recognizing magic at work, Finley spun around, searching for the goddess, knowing she taunted him, baited him. The Morrigan, the washer at the ford, stood beside the little stream running thick with the day's blood. By her side stood a beautiful woman, her black hair cascading in waves down her straight back. Finley's heart dropped into his stomach as he recognized the woman, his own dear Ailsa. Why did she stand with the Morrigan? Why did she stand in blood? He blinked and shook his head, trying to clear his vision. Still, he saw the same picture. The Morrigan turned slowly toward him, her red eyes glowing evilly. So, Finley Sheridan, you thought you won today, and indeed the field is littered with my warriors. She flicked her hand nonchalantly. They were expendable, merely a distraction for the real prize I coveted. Her evil expression nearly stopped his heart. Ailsa, without her, you can no longer win. You can no longer fight. Your failure to pay homage to my sister Maeve has brought you to this point. Think on that during the long nights to come in your lonely bed in your great hall. The venom in her smile turned the blood in his veins to ice as he watched her lead Ailsa across the stream. No! Finley screamed. You cannot take her. She is not a warrior. You're only allowed to take warriors across your river of blood. You defy the Dagda. You defy Danu. Finley lunged toward the stream, yet he could not cross it. An invisible barrier, a wall he could not see, prevented his progress. The gods make alliances with whom we will for our own purposes. The times are changing. The rules are changing. Man must adjust. Morrigan stepped across the river, leading Ailsa, who looked back one last time, her eyes filled with sorrow before she disappeared into the mists. Finley fell to his knees, his glorious golden hair turning snow white in an instant as his life force died within him. For a man to be a warrior, he needed three things: his name, his weapon, and his talisman. A man could fight for a while with only his name and his weapon, but he would taste defeat early. If he wished to be mighty, if he wished to be victorious in battle, a warrior must have his talisman. The one woman the fates chose to complete him, for he was nothing but an ordinary man with ordinary skill, a foot soldier easily bested in combat. Without Ailsa, Finley was nothing. The Morrigan had won. He sat on the bank of the stream and wept. When Finley's sons found him at last, relief and shock shone on their faces. In the morning, when they'd all set out to battle, Finley was a man in his prime, tall, straight, massive, his hair flowing in golden waves over his broad shoulders. A warrior, leader, his men revered and followed without question. Now an old gray-haired man sat on the banks of the stream defeated. His battle gear marked him as Finley Sheridan, otherwise his sons would not have recognized their own father, so changed was he. In a reedy voice, Finley gave his sons the news. The Morrigan has taken your mother. She made sure I made it to the fort in time to watch, but too late to stop her. 'Twas her plan all along, to start a battle to distract us from her real purpose. Taking your mother, my talisman, my wife. He stared blindly into the distance, all his tears spent. My one true love. But, Father, the Morrigan cannot take a talisman. She can only take warriors in the heart of battle. Mother was never a warrior, Graham protested. The rules have changed. The gods have formed new alliances among themselves. Not only can she take an unprotected talisman during battle, but she can also limit the time for a warrior to find his talisman. From now on, a warrior cannot begin the search for his talisman until he reaches his 21st year, and he must find her by midnight of his 28th year, or he becomes subject to the Morrigan. He can join her as one of her champions, fighting against his fellow warriors, or he can become a fugitive whose only allies are fugitive warriors like himself. How soon until this second condition begins? Asked Riordan. It has already begun. Graham, you have 3 days to find your talisman or submit to the Morrigan, or become a fugitive your brothers and I cannot aid, Finley said. The tears resumed. No longer had he the strength to control or hide his fears. Graham paid the price. Within a month of the battle, he crossed the ford with the Morrigan while his brothers watched helplessly. At least he died fighting her and her minions rather than turning against his family. The supreme war goddess's bloodlust and her sexually voracious sister Maeve's unrequited desire for Finley Sheridan led to a blood feud with the most powerful warrior family in Scotland. The war would last for centuries. Chapter 1, Montana, 21st Century. The dreams kept coming, more frequent, more urgent. What started as 1 or 2 a month after Graham Afton died at the summer solstice had escalated to 1 or 2 a week. Alyssa Macaulay's sleep loss meant she couldn't concentrate on her thesis writing. Even more disturbing, she heard strange noises around her house when she awoke from those dreams. Shadow was edgy as well, insisting on sleeping on the floor at the foot of her bed rather than in his usual spot on the rug in the laundry room. At first, she thought the dreams came from her research, but the battles were modern. The warriors dressed in jeans, leather jackets, and boots rather than chainmail, wool, and leather leggings. The battles, however, were as bloody as any medieval combat she'd read about. She could hear men screaming and feel the disturbance in the air as they wielded their mighty swords. None of it made sense, yet all of it was vivid and so real. As were the tracks of someone's boots in the thin layer of snow outside her cabin this morning, a circumstance that sent her online investigating local security firms. When she arrived at the offices of Security Consultants Unlimited, the understated sign beside the door on the second floor of one of the converted hotels in town reassured her. Inside, she observed modern chrome and leather furniture in the reception area, which exuded an atmosphere of competence and efficiency. The muted colors of a watercolor landscape of a mountain meadow at sunset softened the starkness of the decor. The receptionist, a woman with graying hair cut in a close spike and wearing a chic charcoal suit over a magenta silk blouse, addressed her. "How may we help you, miss?" The woman's desk plate bore the name Isla, a Celtic name which gave Alyssa an odd sense of comfort. "I need to speak to someone about a home security system, please." "Of course, one moment." The woman pressed a button on her phone, alerting someone in one of the 2 offices adjoining the reception area. During the few minutes Alyssa waited, the receptionist remained busy at the 2 computers on her desk. Alyssa hoped the business would have time to help her as soon as she needed it. "Mr. Sheridan will see you now, miss," Isla said, her tone businesslike, her expression kindly. According to the internet and the front door of the office, Rowan Sheridan was the branch manager for Security Consultants Unlimited. She formed an idea he'd be a fatherly type who would assure her that his company could be of service in the very near future, like today. When she opened the door to his office, she stared at the man sitting behind the huge oak desk on which sat 3 computer monitors and some files. She consulted the name on the door again to be sure she'd entered the right room. The man was no father figure who would gently assuage her fears. Dressed in a brick red Henley, he looked more like an outfitter for a hunting camp than a security professional. The man was all shoulders and chest. As he arose gracefully from his chair, she saw he stood at least a foot taller than her own 5'2". His size overwhelmed her when he came around the desk to greet her. At least that's what she told herself to account for, but for the butterflies taking flight in her belly. Hello, I'm Rowan Sheridan. His large hand swallowed her much smaller one in a firm handshake. When he touched her, a tingling ran up her arm and lasted for several seconds after he let her go. He looked at her with a curious expression as she realized she hadn't introduced herself. My name is Alyssa Macaulay. I'm interested in a home security system. The man's intense aquamarine eyes bore into her, and she wondered what he tried to see. Do you have certain items or rooms you'd like secured, or do you need a system for your entire residence? He leaned casually against his desk and crossed his big arms over his massive chest. His baritone voice called to her on a visceral level, and she had to drag her attention from the sound into the conversation. Giving herself a mental shake, she responded, My residence. I'm not looking to protect treasures. She shrugged. I don't have any, but I live alone in a somewhat remote area, and lately I've been hearing weird noises around my house at night. With a flick of his hand, he indicated the leather chair behind her. Please, have a seat. She sat. Do you want motion sensors outside and inside your home, or what were you thinking? He didn't seem to notice her nerves, or maybe he was being polite to make a sale. I hadn't thought that far. Perhaps I need someone to come out to my house and determine the best course of action. Would any of your employees be free in the next day or two? Alyssa was hoping that as the manager, Rowan Sheridan only consulted and sent out the other employees on installations. The office looked small, but he was obviously monitoring systems, so that must mean someone else did the legwork, which would suit her just fine. So unexpectedly handsome and intense, a man made her nervous. His buzzing phone interrupted them, and he excused himself to take the call. Following a few non-committal comments, he ended the conversation. I'm sorry, Miss Macaulay. I have a service call, but my secretary will be able to schedule an appointment for you. Oh, I thought as the manager you worked from your office. Alyssa wanted to take it back as soon as she said it, especially in the accusatory tone in which it slipped out. Actually, I spend as much time in the field as I do in the office. I'll be taking your case personally. He gave her a pointed look. Isla will figure out a time that works for both of us. Nice to meet you. He stepped around his desk again and took her hand. This time he held it a fraction of a second too long, and the tingling was even more intense than the first time. Alyssa couldn't figure out what happened between them as he ushered her back into the reception area. He closed the door to his office, and Isla looked up at Alyssa expectantly. Apparently, Mr. Sheridan is being called away. To be honest, I'd hoped someone could look at my home soon, like maybe today. I'm afraid Mr. Sheridan is booked until the end of the week, but I can put you on his calendar for Monday morning. Will that work? She checked her calendar and realized Monday morning would be the soonest she was available too, although she gladly would have rearranged her schedule if she could have had someone out earlier. She took the date, but as she left the office, she wondered if Monday was too long to wait. Alyssa snapped awake, her heart pounding a wild rhythm in her chest. It took several seconds to ascertain she'd fallen asleep on top of her research notes. Sitting up at her desk in the cubbyhole masquerading as her office in the university graduate school, she sucked in several deep breaths to calm herself down. The dreams were coming during the day, and the warrior she'd been dreaming of now had a face. He looked exactly like Rowan Sheridan. What was up with that? The vividness of her dream unnerved her like nothing in her previous experience. In perfect detail, she recalled the events she dreamed. Like sitting in the front row of a movie theater, she'd watched as the Rowan Sheridan look-alike took on an even larger man than he in hand-to-hand combat using the claymores of ancient warriors. Rowan wore a heavy leather jacket over his red shirt as a kind of armor against the blows of the combatants battling him. The size and fierceness of the warrior he faced didn't faze him, but to Alyssa's horror, the other man didn't fight fair. 3 of his buddies took turns aiming slicing blows at Rowan's back, cutting his jacket to ribbons. He fought on, apparently oblivious to the blows he sustained, focused on his singular mission to best his opponent. At last, the huge man made a fatal mistake when he reacted to Rowan's feint, and Rowan ran his sword through the man's chest. The big man blinked several times in surprise before his eyes rolled back and he slumped to the pavement. The round look-alike rested on his sword, his breath coming in rapid pants before his eyelids fluttered closed, and he slid boneless to the ground. Out of nowhere, another warrior who looked a lot like Rowan raced to his side and shouted at him. As she watched the two men together, she thought Rowan should be taken to a hospital immediately, but he didn't want that. At the very least, he should have taken to his own bed, she'd decided. That's when she'd wakened. The ability to recall so many details of her dream afterwards rattled her almost as much as the dream itself. If she didn't know better, she would have thought it wasn't a dream. Obviously, she needed to go home, regroup, maybe leave behind her studies for the evening. Perhaps these Celtic warriors would let her be if she put them aside for a little while. I left you a note to let me be. What are you doing in my room shouting about calling a healer? Rowan growled. Your bloody clothes on the bathroom floor made me think you had a bit of trouble this time, so I thought I'd better check on you. Your back's a mess, Mr. Universe, in case you didn't know, so I was thinking about calling a healer. Jesus! I know my back isn't pretty anymore. 6 long wounds will leave scars. It's a message, Seamus, and I got it loud and clear. Now let me rest. Brown said the last bit into his pillow. His roommate, Seamus Lachlan, grumbled something obscene under his breath, but paid no attention. The wounds on his back were on fire, but if he concentrated on the silver-gray eyes of a certain beautiful pixie he'd met in his office that afternoon, he could ignore the pain. If only he could ignore the message.